Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're suitably refreshed and fortified and energized for the next panel session. We are going to be speaking for the next hour and a half about the topic of access and, balancing access and quality in the tertiary education sector. This, of course, is a very critical issue. How do we maximize the uptake of tertiary education and at the same time ensure that that education is of very high quality? Of course, that brings into play many other issues, such as how do countries afford high access higher education? And indeed, so that's one of the big challenges that will come in. Although I'm Vice-Chancellor here of Sunway University, I'm originally from the UK, which has had a big push on access to higher education over the past 20 years. And that has had, in many ways, good results. But I can tell you that one of the byproducts of that increased access has been higher graduate unemployment, or rather graduates taking jobs that are considered to be below graduate level. And secondly, the fees that students have to pay have risen dramatically over the past 10 years or so. So the access does bring with it some challenges in terms of, are there enough jobs then for the increased access that you have? And how can you afford the system with very high access? So many interesting challenges there. And I would reflect on another point, which is that if you're a leader of an institution which aims to be both high quality and provide high access, you're in some ways having to balance two things which are almost impossible to balance, and particularly if you want to be seen as a high quality institution in the global context, because, for example, most of the ranking systems for universities don't pay much attention to access. If you look at access and focus on access, then you're certainly not going to get yourself many points with the main ranking organizations for universities. So just a few reflections there from me on the challenges that this brings in. I'd now like to just go on to introduce our speakers. In fact, there should be 3 in this session, but there has been a slight problem. The Secretary General from the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia is unable to be here. He has identified a replacement, but unfortunately he is stuck at the airport. We are expecting him to arrive in the next hour or so we may have a third panelist in the session, or we may not. He's here. Wow. That was the fastest journey from the airport in history of Malaysia. Congratulations, welcome. Okay, so let me introduce our 3 speakers to you. So first of all, we have Dr. Connie Chung, who is the Associate Director of the Global Education Innovation Initiative at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is a multi-institution collaborative initiative that works with education institutions in 8 countries. Her field of research is in education for the 21st century, civic education and global citizenship education, including building the capacity of organizations and people to work collaboratively toward providing a powerful, relevant, rigorous and meaningful education for all children that not only supports their individual growth, but also the development of their communities. Very important, that. She's a co-editor of the book Teaching and Learning for the 21st Century, Educational Goals, Policies and Curricula from 6 Nations. She's worked as a staff member, consultant and speaker with various human rights and civic education organizations, and currently serves on the board of 2 non-profits. She was a former public high school English teacher and was nominated by her former students for various teaching awards. She's taught college and graduate students on the topics of non-profit management and multicultural education, and was also a curriculum consultant in the development of a K-12 global citizenship education curriculum. So there we have Dr. Connie Chung. Our second panelist this afternoon is Mrs. Thuy, who is the President-Designate of Fulbright University, Vietnam. Mrs. Thuy is currently is President-Designate of that institution, which is a newly established university rooted in Vietnam, but embracing the American liberal education approach. Before taking this role, she spent nearly 20 years in the financial services sector in different capacities. She spent 10 years running the infrastructure finance business for the Australia and New Zealand banking group in Singapore, and then worked for 7 years in general management as CEO and vice chairwoman of their operations in Vietnam and the Greater Mekong countries. She has a BA from Hanoi University and an MBA from the Wharton School of Business, where she was a Fulbright scholar. Our third panelist from Indonesia is Bapak Mokhamad Mahdum. I'm afraid to say I only have your name and country. I don't know much else about you because you're a late substitution, but maybe when you give your own talk, you can say a bit about your own background, so that'd be very helpful for us. Okay, so I'm delighted to say we now have 3 panelists, a full set, and I'm sure it'll be a very interesting session. So without further ado, let me ask our first panelist, Dr. Connie Chung, to give her presentation.
An honor to be here. I'm going to talk mostly about the quality aspect of this topic, and then try to weave in the access point at the end, and actually welcome your responses to my presentation, because this is my first time in Malaysia, and only maybe my 3rd or 4th time in Southeast Asia in general. So have very little knowledge, but we'll speak about the research that I've done with my colleagues and hopefully get responses from you about how appropriate and relevant that is in this particular context, because I do think context is really, really important. So just a little bit about the background of the institute that I'm part of, the initiative that I'm part of at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. We're trying to understand the ways in which education leaders are thinking and defining and practicing the kind of education that's relevant to the 21st century. And it's actually led by Professor Fernando Reimers at the school. And we have partner institutions in 7 countries: Brazil, Chile, Colombia, China, India, Mexico, and Singapore. And Dr. Yiling Lo from the National Institute of Education in Singapore is actually here with us. And I'm very happy to have had her partnership and our colleagues' partnership for the last 3 years. And we also, in working in education, and particularly around changing education so that it's more relevant to the 21st century, quickly realized traditional K-12 schooling is not quite enough, and that we need social entrepreneurs, we need foundations, we need policymakers. Lots of levers in education need to change. So we are not only working with researchers, but slowly building our network of different institutions so that we can actually impact what is happening in classrooms around the world. We have 3 different main pillars of activities. We convene, we do research, and we educate. On the research part, some of which I'll be talking about today, we looked at the curriculum frameworks of six countries and analyzed it against the most recent research that was a compendium of looking at various different research that has been done on the topic of what skills do students really need, published by the National Research Council in the United States in 2012. And then we tried to analyze the curriculum frameworks of those countries against the competencies that were proposed in that research literature review, and published a book recently, which I'll talk about soon. And then as a second phase, we realized that, well, having these goals are not enough. It's really about implementation, as previous speakers have spoken about. And so we just finished, and I'm currently editing another series of studies, case studies of organizations that we believe are doing this kind of work well in different organizations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then as soon as we started giving talks about this, 21st century competencies, people started to ask immediately in the question and answer sessions, is this just for rich countries? Is this just for rich neighborhoods in rich countries? What about literacy, numeracy? What about kids in poor areas that have no resources? So we added a 3rd research project, which if you go on our website, you can see the results of. We identified 50 organizations on all continents of the world, minus Antarctica, where in different contexts we saw organizations doing this work with children, 21st century competencies. So the book just came out last year, and it's now published in Chinese, Portuguese, and Spanish as well as English. And we basically take the premise that the 21st century is just rife with change, social, economic, political change, what many people call VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Add to that globalization, migration, environmental challenges and opportunities, with incredible interdependence in economics, in basically everything. And then as the recent Brexit vote or the recent elections in the United States show, significant population in our countries and even developed countries are quite have been disadvantaged by globalization, have felt like they are left behind, according to some of the initial sociologists' research that have been coming out. And so how do we address that as an education system, really address the challenges and the opportunities that marks the globalization that is part of the 21st century? And then more traditionally, how do we move from an industrial economy or society to an information society? It requires different ways of knowing, I think we argue. So I am just starting to read, and in the middle of reading Tom Friedman's newest book, New York Times columnist, about his take on the 21st century called Thank You for Being Late. And I was just struck by this one section where he says when he wrote his last book in 2004, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter was a sound, cloud was still in the sky, 4G was a parking space, applications were what you sent to colleges, LinkedIn was barely known and most people thought it was a prison, big data was a good name for a rap star, and Skype for most people was a typo. So I mean, even in the last 12 years, 12 years ago, these things did not exist. And how many of us, our lives are run by many of the things that he lists off. So that's the kind of context in which we're talking about. And then a couple of MIT researchers came out with this. Now I've seen this in many different contexts, but just kind of documenting the changing needs at work. And I don't know if you can see, but if you follow the top, the red line that documents from 1960 to 2009, the number of instances for non-routine interpersonal work non-routine interpersonal skills required at work. So more kind of focused on social, emotional kinds of skills. And if you look at the black line down at the bottom, those are non-routine manual skills. So as the years go on, the need to practice the non-routine interpersonal skills only go up, while the need for practicing the routine manual skills only go down. And then the question is, how is our education system, including tertiary education, which I think, as a side note, even more than primary, secondary, is incredibly cognitive. How is that responding to this changing world, changing nature of work? So in our research, it's actually built on the research of the National Research Council, which identified 3 broad categories: cognitive, intrapersonal, and interpersonal, basically social, emotional, intellectual, including creativity and innovation and getting along well with others, self-management skills. And then we added, as we've kind of spoken with other people who are thinking about these kinds of topics, like the OECD or other thinkers, there's a need for emphasizing not just the content, not just the skills, but also the attitudes and values, in particular attitudes and values in the students. And also pedagogy, I think, is much more important. How we teach what we teach is in some ways much more important than what we teach. I can right now, as I'm doing a 30 slide lecture on how important social and emotional skills are, or I could change my classroom so that students actually get to practice some of those skills. And there's I think a huge difference in the quality of the education that students receive depending on what they experience. So just an example of one of the curriculum that we analyzed, Singapore's curriculum framework, they just became famous again for having come to the very top, risen to the top of the PISA results that came out about a month ago. But that's not one of the goals that's there. The core values instead compose the center of their work, and then it goes outwards towards self-management, towards being a self-directed learner, a confident person, a concerned citizen, an active contributor. And although this is a K through 12 curriculum framework, I would argue that this is just as relevant for higher ed. And a big problem or a big challenge for this 21st century notion of this expanded notion of competencies is that I don't think it can be done in 12 years. So I don't think this is a challenge just for K through 12 education, but tertiary education as well really might pay attention to that. So some of the findings from our research, the curriculum content has broadened. 300-page, long, lengthy listing of many different competencies that ministries and other parties have listed, but still mostly cognitive. In the US, when I analyzed the Common Core framework and some of the Massachusetts content standards, about 98% of them were categorized under cognitive, and then very few under interpersonal skills. So this is not even how it was executed in the classrooms, but about what is listed as being curriculum content that should be aspired to. So implementation, again, is a big challenge. There's a need all across the countries about talking about this, lack of understanding and clarity around what exactly is 21st century skills. Is it really just soft skills, or is it serious, critical, cognitive thinking as well? And then the political will to change the system, as other speakers before me have alluded to before, that is very elusive. And then the sense of systemic coherence and alignment. So you might have curriculum frameworks that have spelled out this very broad ranging of skills, but the assessment system of a country still is very exam-centered. And so everybody takes that one test, and that one test determines where you go to school. And so even if the curriculum framework says all these wonderful, wonderful things, the pressure is to actually take that test and do well. And so that creates a lack of alignment and coherence. That's a big systemic problem. Again, if we talk about tertiary education and how we even let people in, how we even assess which people are qualified to get tertiary education, I think is a big thing. At our school, Graduate School of Education, one of our professors, Rick Weisbord, leads an initiative called the Making Caring Common Project, where recently, a couple years ago, he invited about, I think it was significant number of college admissions officers in the U.S. to sign a document that said we're going to actually broaden the criteria of admissions to our colleges so that we would have better, more well-rounded children or students who are coming in to access tertiary education. And I think that is also a very powerful lever. Even before students enter, who we let in and what that process looks like is a really important question, I think, for higher education institutions to really think about and consider, particularly as it impacts K through 12 education. Let's see. And then the fact that things are changing so quickly in our world, and the fact that it takes our education systems, K through 12 through 16 and beyond, and that it takes that system to change very slowly. There has to be, I think, a different way to think about how education is done. The traditional ways of kind of somebody coming up with a curriculum framework, and then somebody else coming up with a curriculum, and then getting the teachers retrained, and then getting it down to the system. By that time, the needs have changed to a certain degree. So figure out a way in which the system is more dynamic, more communicative towards each other would be really helpful. If you happened to be at dinner last night, where some of the leaders of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Harvard were speaking, many of them were speaking about how they were changing the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences to be more responsive to the needs of their students and society. And I thought that was fascinating and really important, really well done. So this was just the cover of The Economist magazine that I picked at the airport on the way here, and the cover happened to be about lifelong learning, and it's a quote from one of the startups that teaches people how to code, and their founder, Jake Schwartz, was inspired to start the company by two personal experiences: a spell of drifting after he realized that his degree from Yale conferred no practical skills, and a 2-year MBA that he felt had cost too much time and money. I wanted to change the return on investment equation in education by bringing down the costs and providing the skills that employers were desperate for. So again, even in our research, when we were interviewing, the human resources head at GE, General Electric, they were saying, we can get lots of engineers, but we can't get engineers who are able to work in teams and who are able to take their engineering knowledge and create new products and innovate. So it's a different set of skills on top of the skills that we, I think, traditionally provide in higher education. So there's that part of how do we actually get people who are competent and skilled to be in the workforce, but then there's a whole other layers, I think, that you could tackle, and the Jeffrey Cheah Foundation, I think, in talking about the SDGs, I think touches upon that. So there's a wider world beyond the world of work in which we live, and what's the role of tertiary education, what's the role of education as a whole in identifying and helping young people be engaged in solving real practical problems. This is just a series of slides that I borrowed from the OECD about different large-scale problems that I think all of us need to pay attention to: growing carbon dioxide emissions, growing income inequality across all the countries, fewer people are engaged in their democracies, aging population across all the countries, obesity among children, so health is a big concern still. And so I'm actually part of an initiative within the OECD trying to think about what called Education 2030, trying to envision what might be the goals for education for the year 2030. And they are actually pivoting, this is my interpretation, from being the traditional kind of the guardians of the cognitive PISA test and really thinking much more holistically around well-being. So not just performance on cognitive tests, but how do we actually move our education systems, all of it, K through tertiary education, into thinking about individual well-being as well as social well-being and society and world well-being. So including health status, work-life balance, income and wealth, job earnings, housing. How do we make sure that our young people are equipped with the skills to not only be part of something that's changing, but actually create and manage the change themselves? I think it's a big, huge, audacious goal that they took care of. So kind of the same along lines, achievement, well-being, and that happened to be the cover of Time magazine when I traveled to the OECD meeting in Beijing in November that I picked up at the airport as well. This another layer for talking about the quality definition in higher ed beyond the performance on tests or even getting a job, but what about mental and even spiritual well-beings of people? What's the role of education or the larger society as a whole in all of that? So more kind of thoughts around, again, I'm just listing these to a certain degree because in the last 3 years of having deeply kind of immerse myself in the literature, there's so many competencies. And of course, the pushback is, there's only so many hours in a school day, there's only so many years. What is the responsibility of schools and what's the responsibility of parents? What's the responsibility of larger society? So this is just more fodder to get responses back from you about what you think about these kinds of things around communication. So it's not just about literacy anymore. I think one of the challenges is we measure literacy around reading, but actually it's actually about, that's really still very important. But so many of us are now have the ability to also produce. So Tom Friedman opens his book with a little vignette about going to his parking garage and learning that the person who's collecting his tickets in his spare time runs a blog that is bred by people from many countries around the world. And Tom Friedman says it's not the other Washington Post columnist that's my competition. It's my parking garage lot attendant who is now my competition because he now has the ability to do the same kind of work that I'm doing. So that kind of to illustrate the flattening of the world, so to speak. So what are the really critical competencies that enable people to not just survive, but thrive in a world that's changing? What about the SDGs, as I said before? What about wisdom? What about judgment, empathy, thoughtfulness, restraint when we are able to do so much? What about teaching the quality of what not to do and how to choose not to do? What about a working framework to see the world? Knowledge, analysis, understanding, synthesis, and a value set to guide yourselves by. And then on top of that, as I work with graduate students, I teach just one course on research, and I just see it's not just stuffing people with competencies and research skills, but it's really about helping them to a certain degree reflect about what am I good at, what am I passionate about, where do I want to make a difference in the world. The rigor, the relationships, the relevance, all very equally important. Even I think, and especially more so in tertiary education when you're really the last stage of pushing them out into the world, and then. So just to conclude, the big ideas that I think are the main themes that I want to talk about was that the definition of quality education, I think, needs to shift or at least be broadened. And then the access and equity are critical components, especially if you're concerned about globalization and different people from different backgrounds pushing against each other, smaller number of resources, greater number of people. How are we going to actually promote sustainability? I think the equity and access piece are part of the quality equation. You can't, rather than reading about different people, what about actually living and interacting with them? And then this whole notion of lifelong learning, again, K through 12 is not enough to do even a modicum of the things that are necessary. So not only extend it to tertiary education, but using tertiary education to not just teach things, but teach people how to teach themselves the things that they will need to learn for the rest of their lives. And I think that's it. I'm gonna just skip that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Some interesting points there about what skills they need, what is the purpose of the education, is it employment or broader aspects. Actually, you said something that's got me really worried now, because you mentioned someone who wrote that their Yale degree gave them no practical skills whatsoever. My own son is in his final year at Yale. I think I've just wasted an awful lot of money. You ruined my day. Okay, thank you for that. Excellent talk. Now let's move on to our next speaker, Mrs. Thuy from the Fulbright International University of Vietnam. So over to you. Thank you.
You know that I'm not an academic. I don't come with charts, graphics, or statistics. Now, I represent, I think, what we call an institution that expresses the hope and then the desire of the society in Vietnam. It is a completely newly established university. Now, Vietnam have a lot of schools and universities, and I know that a lot of things that in your country, you may take it for granted, that you have a university privately funded, and then you have, I think your children can go to school and with a decent quality, and then they only have to pay a very small amount of tuition. It is not the situation in Vietnam for us. And this morning, I think Professor Woolcock talked about, I think, the PISA score and then the achievement that a lot of students in Vietnam got. And sometimes for us, which is us, how could we get there? We were amazed, because in Vietnam, we have the belief that the government have popularized education, but then the quality of the education have been done mainly by the parents. That's all. So the government have a pretty easy job to bring the quality up. Now, I have to say that I sat through all the session this morning, and I experienced a different level of emotion. At some point, I was exasperated, because I know that for the institution that I'm representing now, we have to deal with so many issues that many of these seems to be completely impossible and contradictory, and they are mutually exclusive. For example, high quality and low cost. How could you do that? Now you want high quality and you want, I think, greater access. How are you going to do that? You want hard skill and soft skill. Now, how can you combine in your curriculum? So all these make me feel like maybe I'm in a wrong profession. But at the same time, at some point, I feel so hopeful, because, and especially when Dr. Connie showed the quote from Thomas Friedman. Thank you for being late. Maybe we are lucky. We are very, very late. And just because we are late, we would be able to make some choices consciously and move up from there. And I also have to say that I also experienced a little bit of Schadenfreude, especially when our colleagues in Indonesia or Thailand shared the complaints about the Ministry of Education. We had exactly the same complaints. So I think that I feel good that it is not our own problem. Okay, so back to the so-called the Fulbright University Vietnam. I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, you add the word international in the name of our school. Actually, we are not an international school. We purposely choose to be a Vietnamese education or Vietnamese institution. You ask why, and You are not the only one asking us why. A lot of people in Vietnam keep asking me that why you want to be a Vietnamese institution. Our Ministry of Education say that Thuy, give up being Vietnamese, just be foreigner. You will have a much easier life because the moment you are Vietnamese, you will be tied to so many local constraints and regulations. But we have been very persistent and consistent in trying to be Vietnamese. This is the reason why. In our society, if you are foreign, I think a lot of people take you, with a lot of, what can I say? They give you a lot of latitude and leeway. And they say, okay, you're a foreigner, so you don't know, and so I think you may be successful, but then because you're a foreigner. What we want is that we hope that the universities that we are building, it is not only, a way to build an institution, but it is a way to make an institutional change in education in Vietnam. In Vietnam, so far, we have only two types of education institution. If you are public, you don't pay tuition or you pay very, very little, and you just go. If you are private, you are for-profit. Every year, you pay dividends to the investors or the owner of the university or the schools, and you make money. You print money. It is an easy way to print money, I have to say, because parents in Vietnam are so willing to pay to put their kids in something perceived good. But our university, and this is why it is the first time ever in Vietnam that the government allow an independent, not-for-profit, private, and Vietnamese institution to be established. I have to say that the process to conceive this baby takes 23 years. And I think a lot of, do we have the concept of we have midwife. Do we have meat husband here? So a lot of people who help us from the beginnings, 23 years ago, and I have to say that I saw Professor Sack here and then Professor Rosengard from the HKS. They help us, putting the first seeds in Vietnam 23 years ago by setting up a program. We can't call it school. We have to call it program because we are not allowed to grant degree. And we started with public policies. Actually, less than public policies, it is economics teaching. So that economic teaching program have been in existence for 23 years until the day that our government made a decision to allow it to be turned into a school, a university, and independently run. And last May in 2016, when President Obama was in Vietnam, he proudly announced the establishment of Fulbright University. And you ask, why 23 years? There are a lot of things we push back. And we say that, okay, if you don't allow us to do it, we'd rather not building an institution because these are the prerequisites in order to achieve a high quality university. What are they? Academic freedom. Now, I know that in many of your countries, you take it for granted, but in Vietnam, we have to tread this one pretty carefully. Autonomy to recruit students, autonomy to set tuition, autonomy to appoint your professors and appoint staff, and autonomy with your curriculum. These are something that in the consensus Vietnam, it is not an easy concept to be accepted. I know a lot of people keep telling us, okay, just relax, maybe say yes, and then find a way to move around. We believe in laying everything on the table and agree the principle. And if we can't do it, we told the government clearly, you can't expect a high quality institution without this condition. A lot of government in Asia believe that money can buy everything. If you have money, you can get the top quality and the best thing that money can buy. But we have been trying to explain to our government that money comes second. If you have a high quality institution that people believe in, money will flow to it. It is like with business, right? I think good investment go into the place that they think that give them the highest return. So we spent 12 years negotiating the so-called the governance system of the school. And only when we know that the governance is up to the standard of what a good institution should expect, then we agree to launch the university. I think the picture of me, which is not very flattering, that you see, actually they took another person standing next to me from that picture. I think he's just the father of university governance, and his book, The University, I think Professor Rosovsky, right? Henry Rosovsky of Harvard. His book, I have been reading it again and again and again, and every time I keep thinking that, okay, what kind of job that an administrator have to deal with? I think it is even worse than being in financial service. But again, so now we have all the approval to build it. And then the nitty-gritty of building an institution start. This morning, you talk about the new generation, what they expect. And we have to make a conscious decision that what model that we are going to follow. We can't build Harvard. We can't build Yale. And it would be, I think, a terrible mistake if we try to do it. Because we can't, I think, go back in time, and we don't have a $33 billion endowment to do it. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have a school like Minerva. Basically, no classroom. Students have laptop, and they move from country to studies. And now they boasted the most selective college on planet. Their acceptance rate is about 2%. Or you also have a model of a school like Olin in Massachusetts that I'm sure that Dr. Connie talk about. That they build engineering school, but with all the artistic and art, the art major people running it. And I'm very pleased to see that the chief technical designer of Bose system, she's a former professional pianist, and she runs the whole design team for Olin University. So with all these choices, we will have to basically to come up with what we want. And I think that it is both a blessing and a curse, because like people who have a lot of choices, you always think that there could be potentially a better choice tomorrow if you just wait for another month or another week. But we can't wait. We are opening our college in September 2018. And our public policies school, of course, again, we open it under the new name of Fulbright University, I think this 2017. The other challenge that we are facing with is convincing the parents in Vietnam that the concept of liberal arts or liberal education is something worth pursuing. In Asia, we know that parents tell the kids what to study and then what profession that you should try to get after graduation. and the kids just follow. But what we are trying to do now is to basically to introduce that concept that in America, I think you take it for granted because you think that it is your birthright already. You have the right to decide after 1 or 2 years wandering in college, then you decide. So trying to tell that to Asian parents, you can imagine that how tough it is. But I have to say that luckily, that because parents are so willing to put money in anything good, we have a hope. And actually, a lot of parents started being more curious about, okay, exactly what it means. And I just want to share a little bit of good news of our curriculum design work that we are doing now. We are pulling together a team of top professors in the engineering school, like Olin, who have basically experienced the same institution building like us for the last 15 years. And we brought in people from like edX or Coursera, and to see how can we bring more like an online teaching into the classroom. I know that I can't advertise my tuition level and saying that, okay, you will never see the professor. You only see the computers. Nobody in Vietnam will buy that. But I know that it is something that the kids want. So how should we bring all this together and make it work? So that's one of the reasons that why today I didn't dare to put up any slides, because a lot of things that we are doing haven't been finalized. And I'm afraid that some people will say that, okay, you say that on that day on the slides, and that why now you change? No, just a bad excuse for non-academic. But I think that's what we are trying to do. And probably some questions that you have in mind is that, where do you get the money to do it? Will the government support you in doing this? Our government have been very generous in giving us land. And as you know, that land in Asian countries is real money. And land in the center of Saigon, it is something that we got. And they give us land. But we purposely stay away from cash from the government because we really want to maintain our independence. I'm sorry for Ministry of Finance and from Indonesia and Thailand. I know state budget and government money sometimes come with a lot of string attached. So we stay away from that. So we raise money from the private sectors. Luckily, we also have a lot of seeds money from the US government. Okay, you may think I'm double standard. I take money from the US government. But then, and I have been very encouraged, especially by being a president and your main job, because you are not academic, you can't teach, but your main job is to raise money and try to build the institution. And I have been so encouraged with the reception of people in Vietnam, in the US, and in the region when they know that you are trying to do something good and something excellent. So on that basis, I think that we have some hope. And I know that it is very difficult to say from the beginning that whether it is going to work or not. It only takes 10, 20, 30 years to measure your success. But we know what we will consider success as step one. In June 2018, when we know that our first class would be admitted, and how many applications that we receive, and how much we accept, I think that we will know that whether we have been successful or not. Okay, to conclude, I try to beat that bell ring, because I think that if I can stop before that, I can assure you one time again, I'm not an academic, because I stopped, I think, right before the bell ring. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Thuy, thank you for that very interesting perspective from Vietnam. Can I just clarify, you said that your institution is not-for-profit. Are you the first not-for-profit university in Vietnam?
Yes, in a true sense, not-for-profit. Because in Vietnam, I think the concept of not-for-profit could be defined as your return. The return to investors is less than the government bond rate. Then you could be qualified as non-profit. But we are truly non-profit in a sense that we are run by a trust. It is a 501c3 in the US, like most of the non-profit institutions.
Okay, can I just ask just one other thing? You mentioned that one of your key issues to have autonomy, and particularly in terms of curriculum. Can I just ask, as you're starting a new institution effectively, what's happened here in Malaysia is that the newer colleges and universities have largely started out by, in a sense, borrowing curriculum from other parts of the world by having twinning programs, dual degrees and so on. Even we here in Sunway have been doing that for many years. Is that something that you would have considered or other institutions are doing in Vietnam or not?
We toy with that idea of joint degree and I think borrow curriculum from other institutions. But we decided not to adopt such approach because of exactly something that I explained. I think the kind of contradictory choice that we have to make. If we borrow curriculum, it means that we would give up a lot of freedom in how you create a more soft skill, hard skill curriculum so that you can train students or educate them for a future workforce. And so we decided that, okay, we go with our own way, design it in the way that we think optimal, and we are pursuing accreditation ourselves.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. We may come back to that issue later. So thank you to that, Ms. Thuy, for that very interesting presentation. Let's move on now to our third speaker, who, and all I know about you is that you are Bapak Mokhamad Mahdum from the Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. Perhaps you can say a little bit more about yourself before you go into your talk, if you could. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so sorry we come a little bit late, and only you get my picture without any further explanation who the picture is. First of all, let me thank you for your invitation for this forum. And unluckily, our Secretary General couldn't come to this event because he has to meet with the Parliament today. And he asked me to come here to represent him. Actually, I graduated from the ANU Australia, and right now one of director of Indonesia Endowment Fund for Education, or well known as LPDP. It is one of the biggest scholarship provider in Indonesia. Right now we have around 16,000 students in more than 135 countries in the world. Okay. Today, let me explain a little bit about balancing access and quality of tertiary education in Indonesia, particularly through bidik misi program and LPDP. Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished members, in many occasions, our Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani, mentioned that there are three most driving national agenda, which are human resources investments, infrastructure, and efficiency of bureaucracy. There are three areas that we have to focus on. It's signaling to us that implementing right policy and education and nurturing young generation to be ready on the competition are the key factor to seize the momentum of growth in the future. The access to education and how government maintaining its quality has been one of the most important aspects to it. Improving and enhancing the quality of education outcome is a great challenge in Indonesia. As the fourth most densely populated country in the world, Indonesia also acknowledged as one of the most diverse countries of people, races, religion, tribes, social and fast democracy and the religion. And now we are very happy to let you know that soon we will elect for the governor of DKI. If you follow the first debate, it's very, very interesting. To achieve what we have today in education policy, it took years to argue, settle, and beg. Indonesia devoted at least 20% of their national expenditure to education. The basic foundation of how much the government should allocate the budget has been assigned in the national constitution. We call Undang-Undang Dasar year 1945 and Article 31, paragraph 4, that at least 20% of national budget should be used for education to meet the needs of implementing national education. But how countries, and particularly Indonesia, ensure the quality access and quality of education adequately by also considering aspect of skill and economic growth? Let we flashback. The framework of educational, skill, and economic growth has been discussed in many ways. One of the professor here, at Harvard, Michael A. Porter, identified 4 phases of economic transformation. First, factor-driven. Second, investment-driven. Third, efficiency-driven. And the last, innovation-driven. As the investment is growing rapidly, the economy demands progressive and the high quality of human capital to supply and equip infrastructure investment, understand and carry out greater efficiency, as well to manage the emergence of newer technology and its innovation, and how we can use it for the betterment of nation. The number of demand for skillful, professional and competent workers in private sector is indicating that Indonesia still remains a vibrant and strategic environment for investment. So if Indonesia failed to design, prepare and provide adequate level of skill, knowledge and experience possessed by Indonesia, it will disadvantage of transformation of the economic significantly. Now, the skills that we earn at school not an achievement. However, source which raise up certain amount on our income. This comes from the study of OECD program for the International Assessment for Adult Competencies by AAC. Another study which measure impact of tertiary education revealed that TE give advantage on individual earning, economic growth, productivity, technology transfer, on capability, and on institution. The study conducted by assessing 99 strong empirical studies in developing nations, which consistently show the same finding. This comes from a study by Minister of Finance, Minister of Education Culture, House 8, and the World Bank 2014. What about Indonesia now? In some extent that we found an evidence in Indonesia is done with those general evidence. Even though the supply of tertiary education graduate constantly increase, the demand to hire more tertiary education graduate has substantially grown compared to the level of supply in the last 10 years. The return to the tertiary education graduates are better than any other workers and non-TE graduates. This suggests that return higher than cost, and development should keep on until this no longer the case. Law of the Republic of Indonesia number 12, year 2012 on higher education mandate that 20% of tertiary education students ought to come from 3 segmented area we call Indonesia Treaty, frontier, outer, and disadvantaged area. This mandatory point has spotlighted how we have to provide greater access to tertiary education for the students from the poor family and who live in difficult situation. We are not only expecting increasing of the student, but the ratio of the certain development in education policy. Some people are lost in translating law of the Republic of Indonesia number 12, year 2012 on higher education, that 1/5 of applicants must be students coming from the underprivileged family. However, that misleading is meant to be both for students from poor family and student who has lower proficiency to achieve in traditional system of scholarship. Distinguished members, ladies and gentlemen, in a way to understand better the issue, we must expose comprehensive fact the direction of the policy of tertiary education in Indonesia. Workers with tertiary education degree are at higher paid level. thus TE is a strategic and essential investment for Indonesia. But how many we have and how adequate number of lecture? The current data taken from Ministry of Research, Technology and Higher Education and Ministry of Religious Affairs reveal fact that we have, Indonesia right now, we have around 415 public universities with around 100,000 lecturers and around 4,110 private universities with around 170,000 lecturers. Interestingly, the level of education of lecturers dominated by those who hold master degree, both graduate from a local university or overseas. And only, for example, the number of lecturers who hold master degree around 150,000. By contrast, the lecturer who hold PhD degree only 40,000. And if we recall the data on the 2010, in general, every 1 million of population in Malaysia, I think we have around 509 PhD at here, compared to Indonesia, based on our data in 2014, each 1 million citizen, we only have 154, so around a fourth. In fact, trend of upgrading skill demand and market will put pressure on tertiary education institution and its system and graduate to possess robust skill to employees. The government is required to design and implement policies to do so. Indonesia has experiment through many policies to enhance the quality by giving them greater autonomy and support with new funding scheme to support the reform. The autonomy was given to manage internal affairs and produce greater result. From our data, the student in Indonesia, mostly, very challenging. Almost 75% overall students come from the middle upper family. Another 20%, 25% will come from the lowest economy family. Must compete to get opportunity either in public university, cannot afford to enroll in private ones. Very expensive in Indonesia. What about government and scholarship? According to law, the Republic of Indonesia number 12 that I mentioned before, year 2012, on higher education we have released Bidik Misi scholarship scheme to help them to compete tertiary education. The Bidik Misi program covers the full cost of tuition and stipend. This is a scholarship running by Minister of Education and designed for the undergrad program. It mainly targets students at public universities. Each year, Indonesia allocated amount of Bidik Misi scholarship around 60,000 students to its university who had applied and qualified for this program. We also have partial scholarship provided through other scholarship programs such as we call Bantuan Belajar Mahasiswa, and also this program for improving the achievement. This program designed to assist those financially needed students who are in the tertiary education to pay for student studies and graduate. To make it possible for the poor student on the margin to enroll. And one of the most significant issue right now, Indonesia also just have one of significant institution we call Indonesia Fund for Education. The government realized that to be able to grow and sustain in the future, a country must significantly abate in barriers of high education access. Therefore, since 2010, a little amount, percentage of 20% of national budget of education, government allocated to be endowment fund every year, and right now we have around $2 billion. We cannot use the principle. We only use return on investment. Even though this organization we call as a public non-profit organization, we call public sector agency, we don't focus on the return, but we have to get return more than our bonds rate, because the return will not back to the management, but the high return will back to the society. LPDP is public service agency under Ministry of Finance, and we accorded with Ministry of Research Education, with Ministry of Education and Culture, and also Ministry of Religion Affairs. Right now, we have program basically in two groups. One we call as poorly merit system. Every single people of Indonesia can apply of this program. And this scholarship is designed for those who are willing to study in best 200 universities in the world. However, we also have a program affirmative scholarship. This scholarship is designed for those come from the remote area, from the poor family. So right now we have around 16,295 awardees in the world. Some of them has finished study around 2,000, and we have around 4,000 are following pre-graduate program right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude this remark, to create higher education of the government to implement sound policies and giving serious respect to the people and country for the commitment to education, we are demanded to take into account fundamental aspects such as quality and accessible education. We hope that the effort given to create more access to education brought our nation step up. And in the future, all children of Indonesia will be able to enjoy the education without any serious constraint. Right now, everybody in Indonesia have a dream to study anywhere, because one of the significant difference between LPDP and other providers scholarship, we don't have any silent prices, any silent costs. So anywhere student of Indonesia can apply to university. I think Fulbright program in Indonesia have silent cost for the tuition fee. And we hope that the future, LPDP as incentive for Indonesia human, as an incentive for Indonesia human growing and developing national capacity will sustain and provide high quality of Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mahdum, for that interesting presentation from the Indonesian perspective. Can I just clarify, you mentioned there that you have private universities now, and quite a number of them. What are the proportions of students in the public and the private system in Indonesia?
Thank you, but I have no data because I come from Ministry of Finance. But roughly, I think the proportion is still in the public university, because every public university we have around 30,000 students. But from the private, they're so very diverse. Some only have 4,000 students. Some private universities also have a big numbers. So I cannot answer directly at the moment.
Okay, I'm just interested because in Malaysia now I think we've just reached a point where the private has overtaken the public in terms of student enrollments in total, which is interesting. And that's, I think, a growing trend around Asia is the growth of the private sector. So I'm quite interested to see how that's happening in Indonesia as well. Okay, well, thank you to all of our three speakers for their presentations. We now have some time for discussion and questions. So I'm going to open it up to the audience, and you may either make comments or ask a question. What I think I'll do is take two people and then ask our panelists to respond to the two. So who would like to make a comment or ask a question? There are microphones available. So okay, we have one, I think, over here, hidden behind the screen that I'm looking at. So.
I don't have a question, but I have an answer. I happen to be a research associate at the program for research on private higher education. So I have the figures for the private share in enrollment in Malaysia and Indonesia.
Okay,
so,
that's helpful.
For Malaysia, In our data, we have 43.1% in private enrollment, and in Indonesia is 58.2%. And this is the figure for 2010.
Did you say 58.2 in private in Indonesia?
Right,
Wow,
and
that's very
the
high.
absolute figure is 908,383.
That's a
Public,
very
but-
interesting answer, I
yeah.
have to say, to my question earlier.
The total enrollment in Indonesia in 2010 is 5 million, roughly.
Okay. Okay. A second comment or question. One there. Okay. I think this one here's got the microphone, I think.
Thank you. My name is Toto Amin Sufianto. I'm a Deputy Director for Academic and Research in Paramadina University in Jakarta. And also I'm the Research Director for Paramadina Public Policy Institute. I don't know, is it a question or just trying to get answer, actually. Working in higher education and also looking at the landscape of this business, I'm kind of nervous because the business itself is in the very challenging moment. As Professor Connie mentioned, that it's the job outside is different from what you are teaching in the class. Some studies said that when we enroll a student, in 4 years, around 30% of the job outside already obsolete. So it's like we are shooting a moving target when we are conducting classes in our college. At the same time, Ms. Thuy mentioned about the liberal arts. And that's actually the toughest arrangement for, especially in Indonesia. The challenge is huge in terms of regulation and also the human resources. Not many lecturers can do that. My daughter is going to Gettysburg College. And by the way, in Gettysburg College, her classmates, many from Vietnam. And I think my friend mentioned that Vietnam has a huge achievement in PISA. So that's a topic. But how to conduct liberal arts in one hand, and then at the same time trying to answer the challenge in the workforce, or Professor Connie mentioned about the well-being. That is quite sophisticated for many universities in Indonesia. It is very difficult to challenge that, but I'm afraid at the same time you witness the growing of mobile apps applications. I'm afraid someday university will be obsolete and then replaced by mobile apps learning system. You know, let's Google. You know, we always using Google to find out any questions. I'm afraid someday some universities will be obsolete if they are not catching up. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask our panelists perhaps to reflect on those two comments, on the growth of the private sector, and also the latter points about we're chasing a moving target, and will we actually be replaced by mobile apps before too long, which is an interesting issue. So, who would like to make a comment?
And at the same time, it is a very, I think, rewarding experience that we have gone through. Is how to build engineering, science, and then marry it with liberal arts. Because now, of course, like you say, we are chasing moving targets, and even the targets are not moving. I think some is going to disappear very quickly, and some new one that we can't even think of is going to surface. And so it is kind of like, okay, you have to stretch your imagination really far to say that, okay, how are you going to build university these days, if you have a chance to do it from the scratch. So the motto for us at Fulbright University Vietnam is not building university. We reimagining university. So how's the university 10, 20, 50 years from now look like? Like you say, maybe no classroom anymore. Only, I think, fiber optics or something. And then even not computers, but then some kind of like a smaller device so that the students can listen in or watch. I don't know. But I think one thing about liberal arts and engineering and science, we believe that if we can marry these two together very well, we hopefully will be able to produce the kind of workforce that they can change and can adjust to change, or they can learn the new things very quickly. And I think that's what liberal arts basically adding to the equation of education. They need skill, but at the same time, they need to be so flexible and they need to be adjustable so that they can change with the society and with the environment. I think that is probably the most rewarding aspect of our curriculum design right now, is that how you bring these two things together and reflect it in one curriculum. For example, the Common Core. What are you going to teach? What kind of electives that you are going to introduce? What kind of working environment that you build? Is it a studio, or is it just a few, like a group working environment? Yeah, hopefully in about 3 or 4 years from now, I can tell you exactly what we are doing. But then I know that that's what we are facing, and we have to solve that problem.
Well, I think we'll be inviting you back in 3 or 4 years to find out how you're getting on. Comments from other members of the panel at all?
I'll take a stab at the very good question around, how do universities survive and change in a way so that we can actually make a difference in the world and actually make a living while doing it, and just like any other sector, right? I don't have 10 hours, so just a few quick thoughts off the top of my head. One of the things I didn't say, I don't think, in my presentation that I usually say is, we say this fancy word around 21st century skills, but these are skills that have been around since the 4th century BC, right? If you talk about collaboration and communication and innovation and creativity, that's been around since the beginning that humans existed. So it's not that it's particularly new in this century. What's new is that it's imperative that everybody has those skills, not just the elite, however you define that. And I think, tying to your question around, what's the mission of a university, I think that's not for me to answer, but I think one of the things you might consider, particularly in this context where so few people have access to tertiary education, is you're not just preparing people to become survivors in a competitive society, but actually leaders, right, of your communities, of your countries, of your region. And what are the particular skills? Those you're not going to get apps for. You're not going to get an app that says how to be a person who creates value for others. How do you create an app that guarantees well-being for other people? You might get a Fitbit that does try to make you personally a good person, but what about creating value for others? Those kinds of almost philosophical, value-based, wisdom-seeking ventures, I don't think are going to be replaced by apps. And I think that's where I think universities, more than anybody else, can add value. Professors have the luxury of being able to have time, supposedly, to think, to read, to listen to, and to ask questions of other people. And that kind of ability to think long-term, long way, and hopefully cultivate wisdom are kind of the competencies that I think we can try to inculcate in our students, transfer to our students, in ways that, again, I don't think apps are going to be able to do very quickly, versus more kind of the ones that are easy to transfer, the deep ability to question, to think about, what are the really important things that we really need to think about.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, more questions. I'll take two more. One from the back there, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Dr. Tan Aimee from Teachers Training Institute in Malaysia. I would like to ask two questions. One is directed to Ms. Connie. Ms. Connie, as I know, you have the capacity, you are working in the capacity in OECD of working in line with 8 countries, right? I would like to share your experience and the challenges faced to implement what you claim or what we claim the 21st century literacy. As you have mentioned so much in developing the self, the health literacy, the global literacy, civil society, what you claim the society, the values that make a person, and then also the capacity, the extent of deep learning that is stretched out to become a lifelong learner. I will be most interested to be enlightened with the actual cases that OECD carry out in the different 8 countries that has been done, how this is done in tertiary education. And my second question is, I will be most pleased where Ms. Dam would share your vision and mission of building a liberal arts education that in building up a university, right, that is needed very much by the society in particular to make sense of what university education is. And just now, at the beginning, you had mentioned about the governance where your institute has tried to seek from the Vietnamese government so that not to be bounded by all kinds of external strings or rules and regulations. And I would like to know how you ensure the academic governance. I don't call so much academic in the sense just paper and knowledge, but making sense, the liberal arts that could sustain the person as well as the society, and in fact the region and the world, and Asian is coming up. And I'm seeing the name called Fulbright. Fulbright, and you say this is not going to be attached by the Vietnamese government, but at the same time, Fulbright is a name that is initiated by US. And yes, we may say that this is Fulbright is a liberal, looking into liberal arts directions. But I would know how this is ensured in terms of governance, and also in terms of curriculum development. Whether this is taking after American model or how you go about that in terms of American, where the different sciences and the core subjects. And thirdly is the academics. I don't call academics or you call your staff and intellects in the faculty. Would be most pleased if you could share with us the actual directions that could be explained or shared with us of your vision and mission of the whole Fulbright Institute that's going to be established. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think those were 2 questions from one person, so we'll get those 2 answered before we move on to other people, I think. So briefly, please.
So I work with a group within the OECD, but the 7 or 8 case studies that I referred to, I did with with our partner institutions around the world. So what we did was we tried to identify at least one organization within each country who was teaching these particular competencies to their students, and try to figure out, how do they build the organizational and the human capacity to teach these broader range of skills. So just kind of off the top of my head, some of the preliminary findings from that research that several or many of the cases had in common. One was actually that surprised me. I think we were maybe subconsciously looking for, here are the 8 steps to creating organizations that teach 21st century competencies. Instead, what we found consistently, again, very surprisingly across the organizations, was how much the people we interviewed said how important organizational culture was, that created an environment where innovation, trying, risking, creating, failing, learning, being vulnerable, being able to share that knowledge with other people in the school, really helped create an environment in which children were then invited to have this broader range of skills, including the ability to take on challenges that were a little bit above what they were capable of doing, yet push themselves to do it, take on complicated tasks, give feedback to each other in a way that was respectful but helpful at the same time, and that it wasn't, again, a list of 8 different things. things, it was that the leaders were able to create a culture in which people felt trusted, people felt safe, people felt like they could work with each other to pursue a goal that they knew they couldn't kind of pursue by themselves. So very kind of almost fluffy in a way, but again, very surprised by the consistency with which these organizations in very different contexts said that was one of the primary things that emerged in being able to cultivate an organization that was a learning organization, so to speak. One of the second things that we also found was, given that these are education organizations, the lifelong learning piece for teachers, for staff members who are leading professional development, or for teachers who are taking part of it, it happened, the most important learning happened at work, versus when I was a teacher, I learned this and that was really valuable. Very few people said that. In fact, they said, what I learned within my organization, that again ties in with this culture that enables learning with other people, and the fact that how much they had to continually learn while on the job, while teaching these new sets of skills, so that they could then, create the conditions under which their students can learn. Those were kind of the couple of findings. And again, I'm very excited to share more about that when the book comes out. But again, one of the things that we found is it's not a 21st century skill necessarily. It's been going around for a long time, and this is already happening in all kinds of contexts. It's just that it's not widespread at a wide scale.
Okay, Ms. Thuy?
Okay. I will start with the name first, because I think that seems to stand out. Fulbright, yes, that's the name of Senator Fulbright. And so the reason that we decided to go with an American senator's name is because of the respect of the Vietnamese as a society and Vietnamese people have for him, and for the Fulbright exchange programs that actually for the last 25 years have produced a lot of good citizens in the society. When we built this university and when we got the license to open it, I think the name of the university has created a lot of debates. So a lot of people say, okay, let's pick a Vietnamese hero or a Vietnamese intellectual and name it after him. And actually, the embassies, the US government have encouraged us to do that. But then the people, the grassroots in Vietnam, and I have to say that probably most of the students over the world, their education dream is actually the American dream. So the society and the people requested us to go to the US government and the Fulbright family and ask for the permissions to adopt the name. And we were very, very fortunate, and we are very grateful for the agreement of the family that we could use his name for our school. And I have to say that it is not the political will, or it is not, I think, some like a whimsy, I think, determination by someone. It is a society who demand that. About the school and the mission, yes, we have the mission. We have our founding precepts, and I hope that we can share it with you, and actually it is on our website. But the mission for us is summarized very succinctly in a few adjectives. So Fulbright University is going to be a not-for-profit. That's something that we know that we will stick to. Independent, private, and rooted deeply in the Vietnamese society, but embracing American liberal education approach or philosophy. That's the way how we describe our mission. And of course, we go with, I think, some other principle like a meritocracy and then good governance. But I think that's the way how we want to build the university. And again, I think you focus on a very, very right point of any good institution. It is a governance. If you have a wrong governance, no matter how much money you throw at it, it was still not going to get where you want to be. So, and again, like I share with you, it took us nearly 15 years to negotiate the so-called the governance structure with the government. And luckily, that together with time, I think the society evolved and then the thoughts evolved, and we have been able to get here. So governance, what we mean by governance? So the governance in a way that you have autonomy, you have academic freedom, and then I think the school is going to be managed for the better good of the society. So another question you raise is again liberal arts. And it seems that
You're going to have to be quite brief now if you can.
Okay, yeah, okay, liberal art. Yeah, it is an American tradition. And again, I think that liberal art is something that we will stick to because we know that what we want to educate is not only the hard skill, but then we want, hopefully, that we can educate an all-round citizens.
Okay, we're nearly out of time. I'd like to allow just one final question. Who would have a final burning question? Ask the lady there, yes.
Thank you. I find this session is really very fascinating. Fantastic presentation. I would say it's one of my favorite for today. We are still talking about access, and I'm very attracted to what Dr. Mokhamad was saying regarding the endowment fund. I think in our country, towards the end of 1990s, we set up what we call as PTPTN, National Higher Education Fund, out of actually the need for access to higher education. And I think what happened throughout that journey, the government during that time put in about 100 million ringgit to start with. And of course, the journey has been very long, and that at the same time has given actually access to many children, many youth from the rural area. So in the case of Indonesia, but at the same time we had issues after that whereby that the policy changed and we had less amount of money to be given to students. So I wonder whether your endowment fund would be a fund that is given to all students, like private and public universities and overseas as well. But how do you sort of plan to sort of retrieve that amount of money given probably after they work, so that other children or other students will be able to benefit as well? And this struggle for access to higher education will continue. I think I would like to know how different it is between our PTPTN here and what you do in your country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. I think that's for Mr. Mahdum. So, do you?
Thank you, Ibu. Since we established in the 2011, we only use our return on investment to disburse to provide scholarship. So there is no mandatory for our awardees, our scholars to pay back to our institution. Basically, this institution has been initiated by Ibu Sri Mulyani. And then she went out from the government, and right now she come back. And right now she want to change the policies. The policies is we will group our applicants. For those really needs support, we will give everything is free. But for those come from for example, the private sector, from the private company, we will introduce co-fundings. So the more money we will get, the more student we will get our services. But I just want to emphasize that Ibu Thuy mentioned, the most important to make STEM organization and governance, is that right? In LBDB, we have to mandate to maintain our fund sustain. So we try to invest in very what we call not conservative but very calculated return to make sure that our return can be dispersed properly. So hopefully after 5 years we will get money not only from the budget, but also from the society, because the trust of the society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's brought us more or less to the end. So I'd like to thank our 3 expert panelists for their presentations, for answering the questions. Thank you so much.
Right, can I ask the moderator to present gifts to all our panelists? Thank you very much.